Good evening, I'm Mark Kelly, and this is The National. Warding off the hazards of legal marijuana. CBC News gets details on the government's safety measures.
There is no question.
Canada joins a growing consensus that Syria's leader must go. Turning Point takes a harder look at Donald Trump's new muscular foreign policy. Can he follow through? Plus, they sold him a seat, then dragged him out of it.
No airline should allow that to happen.
There's been a lot of talk and a whole lot of speculation about the plan to legalize pot in Canada. Early details of the government's new rules and criticism over how long it's taken to arrive. But this Thursday, the government will finally table its marijuana legislation. And Catherine Cullen has been digging for details tonight, including how much she'll be allowed to carry and how police will figure out whether you're driving stoned.
Strict regulation and restricting access.
Make sure that we keep cannabis out of the hands of kids.
We will be moving with very strong measures.
Justin Trudeau may have won votes from some of these folks by promising to make pot legal, but his government's message right now is all about convincing Canadians it will be done safely and responsibly. CBC News and Radio-Canada have learned more about the government's plans. Individuals will be allowed to possess up to 30 grams of marijuana at a time. That fits with the recommendation made by the government's Cannabis Task Force. There will be new, stricter penalties introduced for selling marijuana to minors and for driving under the influence of pot, both of which were Liberal election promises. Also on driving, we can expect the government to approve the use of roadside saliva tests to detect drug use. There will be money for public awareness campaigns and limits on how marijuana products can be marketed, more like tobacco than alcohol. Cracking down on pot-impaired driving has been a particular concern, with warnings from other jurisdictions that have legalized.
We are seeing that more often in fatal crashes, the driver, at least one of the drivers, has THC still in their system. That doesn't mean it caused the crash, but it's certainly a statistic that's going to be worth watching and worth public education campaigns.
The federal government has already been piloting some roadside saliva tests and promises a solution.
That's a commitment that we made at the very outset, and you can expect very robust provisions.
How old you have to be to use will also be hotly debated. CBC News has already reported the age will be 18, but that the provinces will be allowed to set it higher.
My colleagues and I had hoped that the age could be, the legal age for using marijuana could be as high as 25.
That's because the brain is still developing until then.
We also know that since psychotic illnesses do tend to begin in this period as well, that we feel that would be exposing young people to yet another risk.
There is so much to debate when you're ending the prohibition of a drug for the very first time, and the Liberals hope to have this plan in place before Canada Day 2018. Catherine Cullen, CBC News, Ottawa.
There's a leaked memo making the rounds tonight from the CEO of United Airlines. He says staff had no choice but to call police and have a passenger removed from a plane last night after the man refused to give up his assigned seat and the plane had been overbooked. Jacqueline Hansen has the fallout.
The videos are shocking. Before this flight from Chicago to Louisville, Kentucky could get off the ground, local airport police officers pull a 69-year-old male passenger out of his seat. His head hits an armrest, and he's dragged down the aisle of the airplane.
Oh my God! Look at what you did!
This video was taken on an overbooked United Airlines flight Sunday night. Passengers were told United needed seats for 4 of its own employees. But when no volunteers came forward, the man in the video, reportedly a doctor, was selected to be bumped. But he refused.
I have to go home.
Other video supposedly shows the same man running back onto the plane.
Just kill me. Just kill me.
And blood dripping down his face.
It's not all that uncommon for airlines to overbook flights. That way, when there are no-shows, they don't lose money. Both in Canada and the U.S., airlines ask for volunteers first. After that, other passengers can still be bumped.
But a physical removal like this may be a first, according to a consumer travel advocate.
If we can expect to be ripped out of our seats, beaten up, dragged down the aisle, then I think that a lot of people might have a second thought about whether or not they even want to deal with airlines which are operating something, close to stormtrooper tactics. It's not the way to deal with good customer service.
As for travelers on Canadian Airlines, the federal government confirmed that new legislation to protect passengers is in the works.
So that airlines recognize that when a passenger books a flight and is then told that it's overbooked, that they have certain rights.
Frequent flyers at Toronto's Pearson Airport say they were shocked to see the United passenger treated that way.
No airline should allow that to happen.
That's terrible. He's paid for his seat. He's done nothing wrong.
For many, even the wording of the airline's apology isn't sitting well. United Airlines CEO said in a statement, "This is an upsetting event to all of us here at United. I apologize for having to reaccommodate these customers." The airline says it will conduct a detailed review of what happened and reach out to the passenger to resolve the situation. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, as we mentioned, that internal memo from the CEO of United Airlines was obtained by reporters and posted online tonight. Oscar Munoz says that employees followed established procedures and that he emphatically stands by them, and then told the airline side of the story that the passenger refused to comply with crew member instructions, became more and more disruptive and belligerent, repeatedly declined to leave, and says staff were left with no choice but to call police. Well, as some of the world's most powerful foreign ministers met today to discuss what to do about Syria, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau told reporters the way towards peace and stability does not include Bashar al-Assad. But as Hannah Thibodeau tells us, Trudeau offered no firm ideas about how to actually get rid of the Syrian president.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spent the last 2 days reflecting on wars of the past. Today on Juno Beach, he spoke about concerns over newer conflicts.
There's no question that the medium and long-term future of a peaceful Syria no longer includes Bashar al-Assad. How we get there in the short term is exactly what the international community must focus on.
The PM's stance on Syria evolved quickly. On Thursday, Trudeau wanted more information from the UN on the chemical attacks.
There are, of course, still questions to be answered around who is responsible.
Less than 24 hours later, he fully supported unilateral missile strikes.
Canada fully supports the United States' limited, focused action.
Today, Assad had to go.
On the one hand, Mr. Trudeau last week said, let's go to the UN about this, and then the next day he was applauding the unilateral U.S. action. So I think that what we require from our Prime Minister is some consistency of purpose.
The opposition says the government needs to be more transparent about Trudeau's changing stance.
Canadians do need to know that their government has a consistent and a coherent position on this.
Assad and his regime need to be held to account.
Not a clear answer from the Minister of International Trade.
The Canadian government is really in a situation where it kind of has to go along with what the Trump administration is doing.
There's a lot at stake between Canada and the U.S. on many different issues. And Carvin says Trudeau wants to stay in Trump's good books. But outright support for everything Trump does could become problematic down the road.
The Canadian government is probably looking at this saying, okay, well, the U.S. has shown it's willing to act in the world, but in such an unpredictable way, what does this say about U.S. leadership on so many crucial issues, including Russia, North Korea, as well as what's happening in Syria right now?
Trudeau was clear that Russia is also responsible for supporting the Assad regime. But he says his government is willing to impose more sanctions on the Putin regime if it doesn't help end the conflict in Syria. Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Ottawa.
Well, the U.S. has struggled in the past couple of days to articulate a clear strategy on Syria. Is regime change a priority? Is it the United States' role and responsibility to get Assad out? Well, it all came up at that foreign ministers gathering. Paul Hunter has that part of the story.
Just ahead of the G7 foreign ministers' meetings in Italy and at a memorial for a Second World War Nazi massacre, the U.S. Secretary of State today used that moment in history to underline America's view of right now.
We rededicate ourselves to holding to account any and all who commit crimes against the innocents anywhere in the world. This place will serve as an inspiration to us all.
Case in point, last week's horrific chemical attack in Syria, quickly followed by that cruise missile response by U.S. forces against Syria. And so as Tillerson and other G7 foreign ministers sat down in Italy today, among them Canada's Chrystia Freeland, the focus of talks was what next for the Assad regime. To those who'd wonder, might the U.S. strike again? At the White House today, this answer.
If we see this kind of action again, we hold open the possibility of future action. If you gas a baby, if you put a barrel bomb in to innocent people, I think you will see a response from this president. That is unacceptable.
But the larger question is Syria itself. The U.S. remains intent on destroying ISIS, still emphasizing that's a priority, but now suggesting as well the need for regime change. And on that, today,
you can't imagine a stable and peaceful Syria with Assad as in charge.
all of it leading to a critical set of meetings for Rex Tillerson as he travels tomorrow night to Moscow, staunch ally of Syria. Tillerson will be armed with a mandate to now press Russia to end that support. With the question, how far will he go? Paul Hunter, CBC News, Washington.
Coming up, regime change in Syria. There's big talk, but can Donald Trump walk the walk? Top-notch perspective from Turning Point.
Wow! I have no idea how to explain it. I am so excited.
Plus, great expectations as Canada roars back into the NHL playoffs. Following the United States response in Syria, Japan is praising U.S. moves to pressure North Korea, while China urges restraint. A U.S. Navy strike group started moving towards the Korean peninsula on the weekend, raising the possibility of a military response to North Korea's latest ballistic missile test. It signals a possible change in policy from Washington, which previously favored sanctions against North Korea. Neil Gorsuch is officially a U.S. Supreme Court justice. He was sworn in today.
I will never forget that to whom much is given, much will be expected.
The Republicans had to change long-standing Senate rules to get his nomination through. The court now has 5 conservative judges and 4 liberal. An 8-year-old child died following a shooting at a California school today. Police say a gunman went to the primary school where his wife worked as a teacher and opened fire. He killed her, then killed himself, but not before shooting 2 children. The other child was critically wounded. They held their silence for decades. Now, some former Canadian soldiers want to go public. They say they were tortured by their own military colleagues, starved, stripped naked, and forced outside in the dead of winter, and told it was all part of their training. Rosa Marcatelli has more.
This is a 1966 Chevrolet short box.
Restoring old vehicles is what Angelo Bolanos does to try and forget what happened to him in the military. He joined the Canadian Armed Forces in the early 80s.
I felt like I owed my country. We grew up very poor, and I wanted to pay back all the help we got growing up.
We were doing a long patrol.
Jeffrey Beamish was 19 when he joined. In 1984, the men, along with more than 30 other young recruits, found themselves part of what they were told was a mandatory prisoner of war training exercise at Canadian Forces Base Wainwright.
It was cold, obviously. Wainwright, Alberta, in the middle of February is minus 20s, 30s.
Shoving everybody into 2 cells. We were naked, which made absolutely no sense to me, except they kept spraying us with cold water, no bathroom breaks, no food.
This was ice cold water. It was as cold as you could get. Again, the windows are open, and you would be absolutely freezing. The smells of urine and feces getting mixed in to the water.
They also played some Led Zeppelin song over and over and over again. There's no training involved. It was just pure torture for no reason.
I really felt like I was done. I was going to die.
After years of therapy for depression and PTSD, Jeffrey Beamish filed a complaint with the military 2 years ago.
There is no question in my mind that they tortured me and tortured my fellows.
We don't want to damage soldiers. We want to train them, we want to toughen them up, but there's a line over which you cannot cross.
Military sources tell Go Public they've never heard of this kind of training. Officially, the military doesn't deny it happened, but it tells us after investigating for 9 months in 2015, it determined there wasn't enough evidence to lay charges. That investigation itself is now under review by the department that oversees military police. Beamish's lawyer says a recorded conversation between his client and the investigator is evidence the military had no intention of holding anyone accountable.
What is the court going to do to that person for this type of offense? Are they going to put somebody that's 65 years or whatever in jail for something like this?
And torture, you guys never even looked at that?
Okay, so torture, the problem with the torture is torture didn't become an offense until in 1985.
In an email to Go Public, the military says, "We remain seized by this matter, and though there remains insufficient evidence to pursue this matter further, we strongly encourage anyone who feels wronged to come forward."
To me, that was just total bullshit. I think, come on. I'm not asking for anything, maybe an apology.
The Minister of National Defense isn't offering an apology. Instead, a spokesperson for Harjit Sajjan says the well-being of soldiers is the minister's top priority. But because of the ongoing review, the ministry won't be commenting further. Rosa Marcatelli, CBC News, Calgary.
Straight ahead, Canada joins a bid for the Soccer World Cup. Plus, NHL playoff fever at long last. It's spreading north of the border.
A new life for more than 250 people. The Arusa Sun carries refugees from Hungary, those who fought against a tyrannical government and then fled when their cause was crushed by Russian tanks. More than 3,000 people jammed the dockyard to shout their welcome. And they marched down the liner's gangplank onto Canadian soil, accompanied by the music of the Royal 22nd Regiment's band.
Canada is one of the few countries accepting Vietnamese refugees. Under our present quota, by the end of the year, we will have taken 2,000 from Hong Kong. For the past 6 months, it's been up to a dedicated 22-year-old Montrealer, Scott Mullen, to decide who gets in and who doesn't.
Okay, we will accept his application to go to Canada.
How do you know they can adapt to Canada?
Well, if somebody can sail across the South China Sea and spend 2 months on sea, a few months here in a camp situation like this, I think they'll be able to adapt reasonably well.
Noontime, and the would-be refugees are allowed outside for an hour. When the hour is up, they go back, single file, into the stuffy gymnasium that is their home. The Canadian government hasn't had to publicly explain why it's detaining these people for so long, except to say that it doesn't yet know for sure who they really are or whether they'll show up for their immigration hearings.
All of the other illegal immigrants that have come here, they haven't been treated that way.
The turbans and beards are a great influence.
Members of the local Sikh community are upset with the way the government and the way the Canadian public has reacted to this latest boatload of people. This is the image that stands out most in people's minds.
I think they should ship them all back where they come from.
Canada will give political asylum to 26,000 Yugoslavian refugees. While it's welcome news, refugee advocates say the Canadian government is playing a dangerous double standard. They say refugees from Somalia should get the same treatment as those from Yugoslavia.
As we know, the civil war and also the famine has displaced millions of people.
Yesterday, Somalis protested outside of immigration offices calling for fair treatment.
But Somalia is more than Sarajevo. So if they don't give it down to Somalia...
Different language, different culture, different lives. You can see the strain on so many faces. Crammed into a gymnasium, the refugees listen to the Prime Minister explain he hopes they can one day return to their homeland if they choose.
And I'm sure that you can feel at home among us.
The grueling NHL playoff marathon begins on Wednesday. 2 months of intense competition will see the last team standing lift Lord Stanley's Cup. But unlike last year, when Canadian teams were shut out of the playoffs, 2017 brings a net full of homegrown hopefuls. Havard Gould drops the puck for us.
Last year, the Toronto Maple Leafs were the worst team in the NHL. This year, even though the lineup is loaded with rookies, there are fans like this one. convinced the Leafs can beat anyone and everyone.
It's been a long time, sweetie, but you're coming back to Toronto.
The owner of this combination barbershop and hockey shrine doesn't care that his team only qualified for the playoffs on the final weekend of the season.
It's nice that they got in, but we want more.
They want more in many places this spring. Frustration is changing into frenzy in Edmonton.
Let's go Oilers!
Where fans have waited for more than 10 years for the Oilers to get back to the postseason.
I had tears of joy. Like, you know, I'm 43 years old now, and I cried.
3-on-2. It's another case of youth serving up success. Connor McDavid leading the way in just his second season.
Connor McDavid, 100 points. Another chance, fired, scores,
But teams flying a little lower, just playing better this year, still have a shot. Ottawa may match up well against Boston. In Calgary, fans believe the Flames could surprise people, just none of these people.
The Flames got heart, the fans got heart. We're here to win. They're going to win it this year.
Last year, not one of Canada's 7 NHL teams made it to the postseason. This year, the country has 5 teams trying to bring the Stanley Cup back across the border.
I think the best Canadian team, and I realize I could be proven wrong in this in a week, but I like Calgary. The goaltending is probably the biggest question, but defense and forwards, I think they're the deepest.
In Montreal, where they have superstar goaltender Carey Price, many believe their team can win it all.
If you're a Canadiens fan and you're 40-something, then you remember Patrick Roy. And you remember all it takes is one hot goalie, and you can win the whole thing.
You won't be alone.
And Toronto, well, it may have the toughest first-round test. The Leafs must face Washington, the team that finished at the top of the standings in the regular season.
This is the first round. Imagine when we get to the Stanley Cup final. It's going to be...
A lot of people can't.
They're unbelievers.
And unbelievers are unpopular right now, with 5 teams giving fans and fanatics reasons to believe.
I'm going to carve some Leaf logos into the heads of some Washington fans that come in here.
Howard Gould, CBC News, Toronto.
Unbeliever? Your sporting focus may be ice level for the next little while, but Canada's soccer brass has just made a pitch for a bit of your attention, joining today with Mexico and the U.S. in a bid to host the 2026 World Cup. The CBC's Alison Northcott has that story.
It's one of the largest sporting events in the world, and for the first time, it could be coming to Canada.
All 3 of us are committed that we'll...
The heads of the Canadian, American, and Mexican soccer federations are making a rare joint bid to host the World Cup in 2026, banding together to win the votes they need to secure the event and the resources it will take to pull it off. They're also pitching it as a show of unity during tense political times.
We don't believe that sport can solve all the issues of the world, but especially what's going on in the world today, we think this is a hugely positive signal and symbol of what we can do together.
Canada and Mexico would each host just 10 of the tournament's 80 games. The rest, including the finals, would be in the U.S. But as host, the hope is that Canada's national men's team would automatically qualify for the tournament, something it hasn't done since 1986, when Bob Lenarduzzi was on the team.
I know that there may be some people that aren't overly pleased that we've only got 10 games, but we should be satisfied with that and satisfied that we are a part of hosting, I would suggest, the most significant sports tournament in the world.
Canada hosted the Women's World Cup in 2015, and with 3 Major League Soccer teams here, the sport continues to grow.
With World Cup, I'm not saying that's a direct impact, but it creates something that is so major in terms of visibility. So for sure, it's good for the sport.
Details about which cities would host and how much it would cost are still to come, but this professor says don't expect it to be a moneymaker for the host countries.
It's good if you look for status. If you're looking at it as far as a money-generating exercise, no, I don't think that long-term this is going to be something that we're going to have great pride in.
The last bidding process was plagued by allegations of corruption, so this time FIFA has changed the rules. Now every member country gets a vote, not just top officials. The event itself is still years away, and so is the final decision on who will host. That's not expected until 2020. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
Well, we couldn't leave the sports beat without showing you a huge clinching shot from last night. No, not Sergio Garcia at the Masters, though that was a heck of a shot. We're taking you to Alberta, not Georgia, and we're on white ice, not those slick Augusta greens.
One more, a few more licks. Hello, world. Canada is your champion.
That was Brad Gushue steering home the final rock at the Men's World Curling Championships. Gushue's St. John's rink representing Canada beat Sweden 4-2. Gushue and teammate Mark Nichols also won Olympic gold back in 2006. Coming up, another strong competitor from Canada.
He who lives by the sword shall perish by the sword.
You would have made a wonderful revivalist preacher, yes. Yes, that's right.
He's a quiz show whiz who's captured British hearts, but Eric Monkman had an Achilles heel. But first, though, tough talk for Syria and Russia. Turning Point tells us why. First, let's check the day's business numbers. The dollar gained almost half a cent, and the TSX rose by 63 points. Not much movement on the markets in New York. The price of oil is up 84 cents a barrel.
The game is Space War. It is played on a computer. At the moment, it provides esoteric sport for young mathematicians at MIT. Someday, it may train them to fight a war in space.
Whether it's the nice zingy sound they make, the electronic challenge, or just the thrill of controlling what happens on a television screen, TV games are exerting a powerful fascination.
What do you think of the game you're playing?
I love it.
These students at the University of Alberta in Edmonton have developed a series of games that can be played on the computer.
The idea of the game is to manipulate the cursor towards your enemy until you get him in the center. And once you've got him there, bang, and he's dead.
Defender, Asteroids, Missile Command, the names of some of the arcade hits that are attracting millions of video addicts every day. Video junkies have a current favorite. Someone even wrote a song about Pac-Man. Pac-Man grossed more money in arcades last year than the movie Star Wars, one of the most successful Hollywood films. These are not games you would find in an arcade. They are the latest generation of home video, and this is where the real boom in the industry is occurring.
I don't play that much.
They're really addicted to this thing.
This is a story about a game. A game some say is so exciting, so enthralling, so much fun, that if you ever start playing, you won't be able to stop. Your fingers flying over buttons as you jump, fly, crush, and kill your way through an alternate reality.
Alluring, fascinating, compelling. A curse.
They're video games, the flashy, trashy offshoots of the computer revolution.
Its programmers say we haven't seen anything yet.
The first, the best known, the sex change operation was one performed about 15 years ago on a young ex-GI named George Jorgensen, who went to Copenhagen and came back as Christine. When Christine's story was told around the world, there were applications from hundreds of young men who wanted to undergo the same kind of operation.
Well, Diana, now that you're officially a woman, how does it feel?
I feel absolutely marvelous, thank you.
Did you always want to be a woman?
As long as I can remember, sir, yes.
And now that you are, what do you miss most about being a man?
I never was really in intensity a man, or psychologically, so I miss nothing about my malehood.
Lee Davis of Ottawa was born a woman. Recently, after a number of medical operations, Lee Davies became a man.
I was only a kid. I felt different. I mean, I knew I wasn't
My body wasn't what my mind was saying I was. My mind was totally male.
Caroline's surgery 17 years ago gave her the woman's body she dreamt of and a model's salary of $200,000 a year. No one questioned her femininity. In fact, she modeled for 7 years before the British tabloids made her story public. She even played a Bond girl in a 007 film. It's only the British government that doesn't accept the change.
I'm sort of classified still as a man. I mean, I break the law every day if I use the women's toilet. I mean, I can't really use the men's. I mean, if I committed a crime, I'd be in a men's prison.
Back to one of our top stories now, the escalation of rhetoric around Syria and Russia. When the U.S. bombed a Syrian airstrip last Thursday, it didn't do all that much damage, but it swiftly changed the stated goals of the White House and our own government.
We need to move as quickly as possible towards peace and stability in Syria that does not involve Bashar al-Assad.
The Prime Minister is suddenly talking regime change in Syria and implicating Russia in last week's chemical attack. It's all in step with the new line from Washington.
Russia's reaction was not, oh, how horrible. Their initial reaction was, Assad didn't do it, the Syrian government didn't do it.
Donald Trump earned much-needed political cover for seeming to stand up to Russia.
It doesn't get any worse than that.
This weekend, he flexed muscle again, sending warships to the Korean peninsula. Days after North Korea tested another medium-range ballistic missile. Can Bashar al-Assad be removed without Russian cooperation? And is U.S. saber-rattling meant to send a message to other world powers? Well, for answers on this, let's meet our Turning Point panel. In studio, we have Samantha Nutt, founder of War Child Canada. Joining us from Detroit is Saeed Khan, a Middle East historian at Wayne State University, and here in studio as well, senior correspondent Susan Ormiston. She's reported extensively from Russia and the Middle East. Saeed, let's start with you. As we mentioned at the outset, 24 hours after these missile strikes, the planes were taking off from that same Syrian airstrip. Airstrikes were continuing on that same town. What really, in the end, has this changed?
It really hasn't changed much at all. As you rightly said, it was certainly a very surgical attack. It was meant to send a message. But really, there is going to be no follow-through. The only thing that shifted was from chemical weapons to using conventional weapons. The Syrian Air Force has been unrelenting in its attacks. This was more about political posturing, playing to a domestic audience here in the United States, as well as to some degree demonstrating that the United States is more engaged or re-engaged in the region and more globally when it comes to being a policeman.
Sam, I was reading one columnist saying that this smacked of a publicity stunt on behalf of Donald Trump. How do you see it?
Well, I agree with Saeed. I mean, I think that when you look at Donald Trump's history, he is a man who is driven by ratings, and his ratings certainly weren't getting, couldn't have gotten any lower than they were leading up to this. But I don't want to be quite that cynical. Nevertheless, I mean, when you look at it on the face of things, given that his popularity was at risk, and then this played very well to a domestic audience, but his overarching intention, as we know, was to send this message that America is strong and it's back, and he's not going to play by the same rules that his predecessor did.
Susan, what do you see as the impact of this?
I wouldn't minimize the political impact here. Yes, it was posturing, as has been said, but for the first time we're seeing the United States say we're going to punish aggressors like Assad when they do things that we don't like according to our political agenda. And it, of course, sets up Rex Tillerson's visit to Moscow this week. And he said today, and it was quite a bold statement, we rededicate ourselves to holding to account any and all who commit crimes against the innocents anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
That may haunt the United States in the future. That's a wide, bold statement that they are the moral conscience, which is something that Donald Trump has said for months they aren't.
They aren't, yeah.
So it's no longer America first. If you read that into it, it is we are going to do something about Syria, and it's a quagmire, as we all know.
Sam, as you know, this is the Turning Point panel. Let me ask you, is this a turning point in terms of the Syrian conflict?
Mark, I think it will be a turning point depending on what happens next. I mean, will it end the war? Does it really send the strong message that Trump is claiming? The fact that Assad is back bombing the same village just today, you know, not really. This war has gone on for many years. It's likely to go on for many more unless there is an overwhelming diplomatic response, which I can't see coming as a result of this one particular action. What we don't know, though, is what Assad's going to do next. Will he try to send a message to the United States? Will he use chemical weapons again? What is Russia going to do? Are they going to embolden him in this process? How is Iran going to respond? So there are enough things in play right now that it is, I think, quite dangerous. And if any of those pieces begin to move, then we could be looking at a much wider conflict involving many more players, and that would be a major turning point.
Saeed, how do you see it? Do you see this as a turning point? I mean, Sam raises some great points here. This could usher in a whole different kind of conflict if other people are getting involved, other nations getting involved. But how do you see this? Is this a turning point?
No, I agree with Sam, Mark. I think that in this case, what we have is that Assad is going to feel emboldened. He was able to weather the storm quite effectively. He has been able to confirm that Russia is certainly doubling down on support for him. Iran has been unusually quiet about this, but I think that they're willing to defer to Russia's lead. He's going to play this out for the long game. He doesn't really need to deploy chemical weapons again as long as he's able to have what seems to be free reign when it comes to conventional weapons. And the fact that the United States has not responded since he has continued the use of chemical weapons, I think is quite telling as well.
Well, as you heard in the news today, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has now been talking about regime change. Susan, I want to get your view on this. We asked the question, can there be regime change? Can Bashar al-Assad be forced out of power without Russia's cooperation?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody thinks that Russia won't have a hand to play in the future of Assad. What is developing now, and it is a change, Mark, is the United States administration is trying to figure out where they stand. We heard the UN ambassador saying no peace in Syria with Assad in power. We saw Tillerson backing off that statement today. Why? Because he needs room to maneuver. If that is Russia's red line, if they need Assad there in order to go any further, he can't stop the process right there. But remember too, interesting looking at Moscow on this, Assad, in a way, embarrassed Putin with this chemical bomb. We don't know whether Russia knew or had a hand in its execution, but remember back in 2013 that Putin promised he could eradicate chemical warfare, and he would help. And he would help get rid of ISIS, but also minimize the chemical warfare. You know, Assad has proven his ally wrong. He's gone against that.
And Rex Tillerson, the U.S. Secretary of State, said that they're incompetent, Russia, because they failed to do
just that. Either complicit or incompetent. Again, pretty fiery words and a tough way to start a negotiation tomorrow in Moscow.
Yeah, and that should be interesting as well to see. What do you think, Sam, on this? Will there be a role for Russia if because right now this consensus is growing in the G7 that they want regime change. They're talking about bringing in sanctions against Russia. Is that going to be enough to force regime change?
I don't think so. I mean, I actually think that before this intervention on the part of the Americans, Russia was becoming increasingly, there's a bit of a chill between Russia and Assad. And so I think that there was more momentum for regime change prior to this than there is right now. Now they've got to back their guy in Syria, and there's a lot of pressure around that. And I do think that, to Susan's point, a lot of this is about posturing going into these negotiations. I think that the U.S. is hoping that by playing this strong hand in advance that they'll have a bargaining chip at that table. But Assad stays as long as Russia wants him to stay. And so far, sanctions against Russia, attempted sanctions against Bashar al-Assad, I mean, none of these things have actually moved the dial in terms of getting him out of power. And even articulating what that transition would look like, right? That still is an open question mark.
Interesting, and Susan, you touched on this mixed message that's coming from U.S. foreign policy. Saeed, I want you to handle that one. You explain, as our American guest, what is the end game here for the U.S.? Is it regime change? Is it, or is Tillerson saying this is up to the Syrian people to decide? What is the end game?
Well, it's ironic to go ahead and push this onto the Syrian people when it's not a democracy. And the fact that the opposition has not been successful in bringing about regime change by military means also means that Tillerson really seems to not understand the landscape very well. If there is going to be a situation which may be viable here, that would be a semi-regime change, meaning that the structure of the Syrian government will remain intact, but the individual Assad will be removed. That's something that'll be very interesting to see if the negotiations between Lavrov and Tillerson bear any fruit in that direction. Iran has been a little bit more ambiguous when it talks about its support for Syria and the government to not necessarily put all of its stock in Assad. And similarly, I would suspect that if push came to shove, Putin would be willing to negotiate Assad's removal as long as the basic structure of Syria, the Syrian government remains in place and allows Russia to consider Syria to be its client state there.
But Russia has to be the driver, and that's the critical point here. And, you know, endgame, the U.S., do they know? I mean, you heard the White House spokesperson today saying that barrel bombs would move the dial, you know, have the U.S. respond militarily, and they had to back up from that.
It sounds like they're making it up on the fly right now.
I think they really are, yeah.
Susan, I wonder, too, how do you think that this is going to play in Russia? You spent a lot of time in Russia. Is there going to be pressure on Putin to support Assad or to back away right now?
I think Russians will support their president. There's no indication that they are backing off the Syrian war. It has made them world leaders. It's made all the path through Syria go through Moscow. There's still support for that. What's stunning in the speed in which this has happened, Mark, is that the warm relations we heard so much about before the inauguration, and I talked to Russians about who wanted a warmer situation between the two countries, that has disappeared. We've now got Tillerson going with an aggressive stance to Moscow, and the Prime Minister Medvedev saying on the weekend, that's it, it's over. We don't trust Trump. So much for better relations.
The bromance is over.
Let the posturing begin,
yeah,
right?
Indeed. Well, and I want to move, Sam, let's talk quickly about North Korea, because we're seeing now the U.S. is moving warships to that region. I'm wondering what you expect to see happening next in that conflict.
Well, I mean, it's actually quite frightening what's happening in North Korea in terms of their expansive nuclear capabilities and acquisition of enriched uranium, for example. They had two nuclear tests just last year, for example. So I think that is a very frightening situation. Surely that this was part of the calculation on Trump's part in terms of what happened in Syria to say, okay, look, it's back. We're not afraid to use military force. That includes some of these other outlying dissidents, including Kim Jong-un. But that is a frightening situation, and it will require cooperation with China. And the extent to which the United States continues to push China to, in many ways, alienate China, to alienate Russia, those are the allies they're going to need if they're going to contain North Korea. So that's something we really need to keep a close eye on.
Saeed, how do you see this? I'm wondering, as the U.S. moves these warships to that region, is this something that will, you know, it's saber rattling? Is this going to rattle the nerves of Kim Jong-un?
Well, I think that the deployment of the Carl Vinson battle group there is not just for North Korea. I think it's also to send a slight message to China, given China's expansion into the South China Sea, as well as the creation of so many of these artificial islands. But I want to pick up the point that Sam made with this word ally. I think it's fascinating that the United States has to consider China to be its ally when it comes to North Korea. The fact that the United States has to consider Russia to be its ally when it comes to a negotiated settlement regarding Syria. Gone are the days of American unipolarity, and now it has to concede that it has to make these negotiations. Now, the question is, can Trump go ahead and make these deals? So far, he's been trying to organize himself and to promote himself as a businessman and making deals that way. That is now over. He has to face the facts that he has to approach life and geopolitics as a statesman, and I'm not sure he's made that turn yet.
Do you think he would be prepared to launch missile strikes against North Korea?
He may well want to, but he's going to be tempered by China. He cannot simply go ahead and deploy missiles even if he wanted to.
Okay. Well, obviously, this is one of the biggest stories that's unfolding before us right now, and we'll continue to follow it. Saeed Khan, great to talk to you. Sam Nutt, Susan Ormiston, thanks so much for your time. Coming up next, Sesame Street introduces a Muppet with autism. We hear from people who hope she'll make a difference.
Julia, you're so creative.
Yeah, you're really good at painting. High five, Julia. Huh? Huh?
Well, a new neighbor moved to Sesame Street today, but Julia plays and behaves a little differently than the others. The groundbreaking character has autism. And as Stephanie Van Kampen tells us, this Muppet might be a more realistic portrayal than most of the acting roles we've seen from Hollywood.
Hi, Julia. I'm Big Bird. Oh.
Julia's just concentrating on her painting right now.
Julia is a green-eyed, cheery 4-year-old with a knack for song lyrics and an aversion to loud noises.
Come on.
She's the first Muppet on Sesame Street with autism.
Play, play, play. me.
Julia is less verbal than other characters and sometimes doesn't respond or make eye contact when someone speaks to her. Behaviors parent Annie Fayez recognizes. Her 5-year-old son Zen has autism.
She's just like Zen. The stereotype behavior, hand flapping. I like her.
There are no catch-all autistic characteristics, but Julia displays a few common ones.
Butterfly.
Traits her creators agonized over.
It was the right time and doing it well, which is why it took us over 5 years of research to actually bring Julia to life.
Julia is timely. Autism is now the most commonly diagnosed neurological disorder in Canada. 1 in 94 children between the ages of 6 and 9 are on the spectrum, and across North America, autism is on the rise. Hollywood is trying to represent that with more films starring characters with autism, but many say they've been missing the mark for years. Going back as far as 1988 with Dustin Hoffman's Oscar-winning Rain Man.
Surprise me.
More recently, films like The Accountant and the new Power Rangers movie have featured a main character with autism. And while they end up being the hero, what they're not is realistic, according to stand-up comic Michael McCreary, who has Asperger's, a form of autism.
They recognize difficulties with being on the spectrum, but then they give them a superpower to negate that. And I think that's kind of condescending.
The answer, according to McCreary, lies in consulting people who know autism best, from the stage to the screen.
I would like to introduce you to my first guest ever. I welcome Channing Tatum.
Carly Fleischman, another Canadian entertainer with autism, has become a YouTube sensation for her talk show, even though she doesn't speak. The 22-year-old's interview with Hollywood star Channing Tatum went viral last year with nearly 4 million views, and she's just landed a deal to produce more monthly episodes. Carly speaks through a computer program that voices what she types.
I don't think the intention of Sesame Street is always to...
She says it's impossible to portray autism perfectly. But Sesame Street's Julia is a start.
I wish I had this Sesame Street character when I was growing up, and it might have helped me in making friends.
Sesame Street aims to teach children that people with autism have something to bring to the table, a lesson that could shape views of the disorder for generations. Stephanie Van Kampen, CBC News, Toronto.
Coming up, more than 50 years after Beatlemania comes Monkmania, as Britain goes crazy for a brainy Canadian.
I'm Anna Maria Tremonti. Tomorrow on The Current, the story of young Tanzanian girls who risk their lives and run away from home in search of a safe house to avoid female genital mutilation. That story on The Current, weekday mornings at 8:30 on CBC Radio 1.
Monday, October 19th. The slide that didn't stop. Stock markets around the world go into a tailspin.
It's Black Monday. There's never been a day like this one on the stock market. Panic selling has shattered records.
Fear, pandemonium, and incredible force wreaking havoc in financial markets throughout the world.
It's bad, bad. One word, plummet. Panic selling.
Panic selling, that's all it is. Crazy in there. It's really busy, really hectic.
Jeffrey, not a good day.
By the closing bell on the New York Stock Exchange, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had plunged a record 508 points for a one-day loss of 22.6%, far surpassing the 12.8% drop on October 28, 1929, the day some say heralded in the Great Depression.
The Great Crash in 1929. The day the market fell, the stocks plummeted in value, paper fortunes wiped out, and much of the world left with a headache that lasted for a full decade.
What was it like? You were there 40 years ago. Well, it was bedlam and madness and fright and terror, and in some cases people committing suicide who had several $1 million at one moment, and then within a week they had nothing. Could it ever happen again? I suppose everything can happen again.
Stock markets around the world went on a wild ride today.
190 points in the morning, then down again, then up again, finally closing up by 102 points. A record one-day gain, which nevertheless recouped only a fifth of yesterday's big losses.
They're all coming back now. Even the dogs have a new day.
The economic fundamentals in this country remain sound, and our citizens should not panic.
Governments today acted swiftly and decisively. They lowered interest rates and they pumped billions of dollars into the financial system. Moves designed to end the fear that the stock market crash will precipitate an economic recession.
It's just a crazy market. You can be dead in 20 minutes.
We're looking for some more sizable swings, sometimes up, sometimes down for the next few weeks, before it's really clear what the trend will be.
Another volatile day on financial markets throughout the world. Prices started plunging in London. Panic quickly spread as Wall Street opened for business. And it put all other North American stock exchanges into another nosedive.
Glad the weekend's here. One more day to go, thank God. Lose my voice as it is. I know that. Oh, wait a minute. Yes.
In the U.S. alone, $600 billion were wiped off the value of stocks in a single week. Investors could only watch in helpless fascination.
Even if you lost tens of thousands of dollars, you know, you could find something, you know, it's fascinating. The way sometimes a bloodbath is fascinating.
Now we are taking you back to the Masters for a moment. Sergio Garcia winning the iconic green jacket. You could call it priceless. But then there's this. An authentic Masters tournament green jacket from the 1950s found at a thrift store for just $5. This weekend it's sold at auction. Guess how much? Go ahead, guess. Would you believe more than $139,000? And still, no one knows whose jacket it was originally. Well, before we go tonight, the story of a Canadian who's taken the UK by storm. Eric Monkman is the biggest thing since Brexit. In fact, he's inspired a movement of his own called Monk Mania. It's all to do with a long-running and popular TV quiz show, dominated this year by an unlikely sensation from Oakville, Ontario. Thomas Degg picks up the story.
At a storied and acclaimed university like Cambridge, what could break the calm of a sleepy Monday evening but a trivia contest? Better yet, a quiz show final on national TV with the home team led by an unlikely Canadian star.
He's just a really kind of quirky, cool Cambridge guy.
Hello, my name is Eric Monkman. I'm from Oakville, Canada, and I'm studying economics.
Monk Mania is front page news here in Cambridge, and tonight it's a packed house here at Wolfson College as their team takes on a crew from Oxford in the final.
Okay, fingers on the buzzer.
This year's contest began several months ago, and Monkman quickly made a name for himself across Britain.
Zero, Discworld, blunt.
With those unique facial expressions and his earnest demeanor, not to mention his seemingly endless knowledge.
Olson Monkman. Christina?
The program's called University Challenge, like Jeopardy meets Reach for the Top, a quiz show with university students as contestants and questions that seem impossible to most.
What name is now given to the object discovered on January the 1st, 1801 by the Italian astronomer Giovanni Piazzi?
Also Monkman. Ceres?
Ceres is correct, yes.
Monkman's smarts have earned him an army of fans, tweeting messages with the hashtag MonkMania. We now know God walks amongst men, one said, or I think I love Monkman more than I love my own children.
I mean, it's like watching an Olympic athlete.
Justin Yang from Vancouver happens to be one of Monkman's teammates, competing for Cambridge's Wolfson College, making it all the way to tonight's final match.
No, anyone like to buzz some Wolfson Monkman?
Vienna?
The crowd followed along with every question. Without Monkman himself on hand, he's staying away from the spotlight for now.
There is absolutely no shame in being runners-up.
In the end, though, disappointment. On screen, the other team got the trophy, presented by the famed scientist Stephen Hawking. Monkman coming so close to the title, while proving fame can come in unlikely ways.
The magic flute.
Correct.
Thomas Dagler, CBC News, Cambridge.
I'm making us proud. Now here's a sneak peek at a feature story we're working on for later this week.
I'm Duncan McHugh in Georgetown, PEI. Canada is aging and fast, and that could mean a troubled economy if seniors don't start working longer.
And that's just fine with some baby boomers.
Oh, I'm gonna go until I drop, man. I love working.
I need to work, bottom line.
Could baby boomers be changing the way we think about retirement?
It's the minority of people who actually want retirement to be a day in their life.
That's Freedom 85, coming soon on The National.
And that's The National for this Monday night. For news at any hour, you can always go to cbcnews.ca. I'm Mark Kelly. Thanks for watching.